Black Clover is littered with problems. From the obvious things like how Asta's real magic is that he manages to not make people's ears bleed, to the slightly less obvious what happens in 2 pages of the manga takes roughly 20 minutes of the anime. But what stuck out to me immediately was just how much it fails to frame its protagonist in a way that invests the audience into their story. Since this is trying so hard to emulate the success of Naruto, I feel like I'm obligated to make this comparison. So here we go. Naruto and Asta are both orphaned, hyperactive little troublemakers with no friends that can harness mysterious and very dangerous abilities who one day dream of being the very best like no one ever was so that they finally get the respect and privilege they believe they deserve. By that description alone, while you may have some inclination to like them for their underdog qualities, there's nothing terribly likable about them from the onset. And just like any good series with an unappealing protagonist, the job of the first episode is supposed to invest you in that character so that you're ready to watch them grow. Naruto does this masterfully, not through any noteworthy writing ability of Kishimoto, but instead through its framing. See, what Naruto has that Asta doesn't is a character that loves him unconditionally, a character that, despite being subjected to Naruto's insufferable behavior, still sees something worth loving. Iruka. Because of Iruka, if the audience hasn't come around to Naruto by the point in the story where he's literally sacrificing himself for our main character, we are handed a reason to want to see Naruto grow. We don't want to disappoint Iruka. Because he believes in Naruto, we come to believe in him. Of course, that's not the only part of this framing that works. You see, Naruto spends a lot of time focusing on the titular character's loneliness, his emotional state of being. We don't just see him as an underdog trickster that wants respect, we see him as a kid that everyone hates, who by his own admission has no one to go home to.
You're not going home till you've cleaned off every single drop of paint.
So what? It's not like there's anyone waiting at home for me.
And whose mood is brightened by the prospect of a good meal. These things paint Naruto as a very human character, but what's perhaps even more effective is the visual storytelling, with the early series' most prominent symbol of Naruto's loneliness, the swing. There are multiple shots in the first episode that assault the viewer with the image of the lone swing outside of the school. If the dialogue wasn't making it sink in, then that alone reinforces what we're supposed to understand about Naruto. Alternatively, Asta. Where do I even begin, aside from all the screaming, because dear lord, that boy's lungs. Asta may not have friends because he's clearly bullied by the other children and physically abused by the nun he so daftly wants to marry, but he's not lonely. They all still take care of him. He has a roof over his head, he has people to come home to. While he may not have great meals, he's certainly fed. If nothing else, he fends for himself just fine. While it is implied that he's living in poverty, not once do we ever just see it faze him. Aside from not being able to marry the sister and the fact that he just sort of tells us that people treat the orphans poorly because of their unfortunate circumstances, he's overall content with his lot in life. Can't use magic? Exercise. Can't marry a nun? Try again. Told you can't do it? Just try harder. No doubts, no insecurity, no anything. Unbridled optimism and eagerness can only go so far, but if a character is constantly thrown the obstacles of reality and never seems to get hit by them, how is an audience supposed to follow? We're just told that the orphans get it bad, but we never see that.
My room? No way!
Wait, you're actually happy?
This is the first time I've ever had a space of my own! Back at the church, everybody crammed into one room! We were all lined up like sardines!
This is episode 6! Fuck this show! Don't tell! God fucking damn it!
Go on.
Fuck! Okay. Even if they didn't have separate beds, in this world magic is everything, so there's no orphan pile on a tiny mattress to share warmth because even shit kid Nash can do fire magic. The place at least thrives on some form of agriculture, meaning they probably never go a day without food, just more than likely meat. And even then, that doesn't make sense, especially thanks to the weird filler montage of Asta and Yuno traveling, suggesting that hunting is definitely an option as long as you have magic, which everyone but Asta does. Okay. Everything about the way Asta is framed for us gives us more reason to hate his behavior. He's obnoxious, belligerent, loud, stubborn, and extraordinarily stupid. And for no other reason than main character. I could go on, but rather than that, where do we begin to fix this issue? How do we correct the framing of Asta? Well, for one, his impoverished situation needs to be clear earlier. So let's try this on for size. Sister Lily is preparing the meals for the children when she realizes there's not enough for everyone. But when dinner is served, all of the kids have food in front of them. She quietly exits the room, having sacrificed her own meal for them. Asta, due to his infatuation, takes his portion and follows her, offering her his meal. She declines, saying she has to put the kids first, but he insists. When his stomach growls, she instead suggests they share it, and Asta eagerly agrees. They eat together, and the scene ends with the punchline of Asta suggesting, "Wouldn't it be nice if they did this every night as husband and wife?" There. The church is poor, and you get Asta's inability to give up on marrying Sister Lily in one go. It also establishes a selflessness to Asta that we don't otherwise get to see. And it's also much, much less annoying. But that's not the only way to really reframe our main hero. Remember what I said about Iruka? How having a character that loves Naruto unconditionally is what helps reinforce our desire to see the protagonist go on his journey? Asta can and should have that too, and I get the feeling he's supposed to based on the backstory we're given for Yuno. But they don't do a good job of conveying that. Okay, hang on just a sec, because on top of needing to justify this statement, I really need to make a short case for the dub right here. So in rewatching the first episode for this video, I actually watched this in English for the first time and noticed something that was not clear in the original Japanese. You know how episode 2 ends on the shot of the little fist bump with Asta and Yuno, and it's a recurring image in the opening as well? It was not until I first heard the dub that I realized what Asta was doing here. In Japanese, his ne doesn't come off as trying to get Yuno to do the thing, because both the intonation and the actual particle generally lack in meaning. It was Dallas Reed's that made me realize that Asta is making a callback to something from their childhood. Now, sure, part of that is on me for not paying that much attention. It is a distinct visual cue, but my point stands because there's no weight that lingers on the visual alone. The shot moves on pretty quick, so when you finally get to see the fist bump with sort of their promise's seal, you don't think back to when Yuno denied it, especially not in Japanese. So when I say they didn't do a good job of it, this is what I'm talking about. Unlike the swing in Naruto, the fist bump fails to hold that weight. This flaw can also be attributed to the fact that episodes 1 and 2 really should not have been split up, but anyway, back to the original video. Instead of using this flashback to further ground the protagonist within the realms of their story and ultimately humanize them in a way that compels the audience, we're instead given flaccid motivations as to why crybaby Yuno stops crying and Asta proving to us that despite 6 or so years, he has not matured at all. This was the moment to sell Asta, and it was squandered to make Yuno, an already likable character simply because he doesn't say shit, more likable, by making him a goddamn cupcake. So let's try this instead. Because Yuno is so meek, he is bullied by the other kids in town, but Asta, his best friend, stands up for him. He beats up the bullies and promises to always protect Yuno because that's what friends do. Yuno relies on Asta's strength and looks up to him, believing that if anyone will become the Wizard King, it'd be Asta. Yuno gets mugged in town when he's alone, and Asta bursts in to rescue him like usual, but the thief is an adult and stronger than Asta. Yuno watches as Asta gets beat up again and again, terrified and wishing he could do anything other than cry. That's when he discovers his own magic, and Yuno saves Asta. And this is the day he stops crying. At first, Asta's happy for him, but the dynamic slowly changes as Yuno can stick up for himself. Because Asta can't use magic, Yuno decides he must become the Wizard King so that he can keep all the promises that Asta made, to make up for all the times that Yuno needed to be saved. Yuno doesn't consider him a rival not for his lack of magic, but instead because he sees them as friends. This upset in their relationship troubles Asta, desperately wanting to have magic not because he wants to be Wizard King anymore, but because he wants Yuno to need him again, because he thinks that's what their friendship was about. So when Yuno is in trouble after receiving his grimoire, Asta gets that chance. He saves Yuno and gets his own grimoire, and in turn, Yuno claims them rivals because that's what his friend wants most. They finally understand each other again, and their journey to be the Wizard King is immediately framed for us as a friendly rivalry towards the top. Look, Framing your characters isn't just about context. It's about giving an emotional baseline for your audience to start from so that when the magical journey balloon starts to take off, they're able to step into the carriage as opposed to chasing it down and grabbing desperately at the rope dangling off the edge. And that's what Black Clover ultimately lacks. When you're working in fiction, especially something like a fantasy with no familiar setting, it is imperative that your characters start off grounded with something more than an archetype for your audience to relate to. No one is ever able to see our own faults better than ourselves, so it stands to reason that we don't want to be watching characters that embody our own bad decisions and behavior. Your readers, your viewers, your players, they don't necessarily need to insert themselves into the role of the MC. They just need to understand them. They just need common ground. Whether it's by establishing their loneliness, or their good nature, or their sense of justice, what your audience really needs is a character they want to watch, one they will maybe even start to love. So that in time, like that faulted character they hated early on, they might start to like themselves a bit better too. I know, Black Clover is super outdated at this point, but forgive me, I wrote the script around episode 7, and hey, I already said there's no way I could make content quickly. That's why the Patreon is by video only, so if you're into video essays like this, check it out maybe? Even just $1 helps and gets you access to notes and updates about future videos. Until next time, thanks for listening to me word vomit.